The Duke found the note at dawn, tucked beneath the inkwell on his writing desk, and by the time he reached the second line, his hands had begun to shake. He had not slept. That was the first strange thing. Nathaniel Hale, the Duke of Wexmoor, had risen before the servants, as he often did when the dales were still gray with mist, and he had come down to his study, expecting nothing but the cold grate and the day's correspondence. Instead, there was a single folded page on his desk, in a hand he knew as well as his own, because he had watched it fill 100 ledgers and letters over the past 4 years. Her hand, Eveline's. He read it standing up. He read it 3 times, and then he sat down very slowly in his chair, the page trembling between his fingers, and understood that the woman who had quietly run his entire household, who had raised his motherless daughter, who had been in every room of his life for 4 years, was gone. She had left in the night, and in the few short lines of that note, she had told him something she had never once said aloud in all that time.
She had loved him, from the very beginning, in silence, every single day, while he looked straight through her. Before I tell you what else that note contained, you have to understand who Eveline Carrow was, and how a man can live beside someone for 4 years and never once see what is standing in front of him. And if a story about a love that was hidden in plain sight is the kind of story that holds you, stay with me to the end, because the Duke of Wexmoor was about to learn that her goodbye was not the whole truth. It was only the part she was willing to let him see.
Eveline had come to Thornwood Hall 4 years before, on a wet autumn afternoon, with one small trunk and a letter of character from a vicar's widow in the next county. The Duke had barely looked at her.
He had been a different man then, hollowed out by the death of his wife only months earlier, moving through his great house like a ghost haunting his own life. His infant daughter, Grace, cried for a mother who was no longer there, and the Duke could not bear to be in the same room as that crying, because it sounded too much like his own heart.
He needed someone to manage the household and care for the child. The vicar's widow had recommended Eveline. He had hired her without a second thought, and without, in truth, ever quite seeing her face.
That was the beginning of 4 years in which Eveline Carrow became the quiet center of Thornwood Hall, and the Duke never noticed it happening.
She was not a beauty in the way the world counted beauty. She was tall and plain-featured. With brown hair she wore plainly pinned, and steady hazel eyes that missed nothing. She spoke little. She never pushed herself forward, but slowly, in a manner so gradual that no one in the house could have named the day it happened, the cold and broken household began to warm around her. The fires were always lit now. The little girl stopped crying in the night. The Duke, who had eaten alone in silence for months, began to find that somehow there was always a proper meal, always a fire in his study, always the small comforts a grieving man does not know how to provide for himself. He never asked who arranged it. He simply began, without realizing, to be able to breathe again. And Eveline did all of it, while loving him and saying nothing.
She had no right to her own feelings, and she knew it. She was a servant in his house, plain and poor, and he was a duke who had loved and lost a wife so beautiful that her portrait still hung over the great staircase. Eveline harbored no foolish hopes. She had simply, somewhere in those 4 years, given her whole quiet heart to a man who would never think to want it, and she had decided that loving him in silence and caring for his child was enough.
It was more than she had ever expected from life. She asked for nothing more. The Duke, for his part, came to rely on her the way a man relies on the ground beneath his feet, which is to say, completely, and without ever once thinking about it. She was simply always there. When little Grace took her first steps, it was Eveline's hands she walked toward. When the child had nightmares, it was Eveline who sat with her. When the Duke himself, late at night, could not sleep for grief, he would sometimes find Eveline still awake in the small parlor, mending by candlelight, and he would sit with her and say nothing, and her quiet presence would ease something in him that he could not have explained. He thought of her, when he thought of her at all, as part of the house, as reliable as the walls. He never once asked himself what it cost her to sit with a grieving man and ask for nothing.
And now she was gone, and the note on his desk had finally told him everything she had never said.
He read it a fourth time, his eyes moving over the careful, steady lines.
She wrote that she was sorry to leave without a proper farewell, but that a clean break was kinder. She wrote that Grace was old enough now to do without her, and that a new governess could be found easily enough. She wrote that her 4 years at Thornwood had been the happiest of her life, and that she would carry them with her always. And then, near the end, in a hand that wavered just slightly for the first time, she wrote the line that had stopped his heart.
She wrote that she had loved him from the day she arrived, that she had never expected him to love her in return, and that she was leaving precisely because she could no longer bear to be so near to him while keeping such a thing locked away. She asked his forgiveness. She asked him not to look for her.
The Duke sat in the gray dawn light with the note in his hands, and he felt the 4 years rearrange themselves behind his eyes. The fires always lit.
The meals always ready. The quiet figure mending by candlelight while he sat in silence and took her presence as his due.
He had been blind. Worse than blind. He had been so wrapped in his own grief that he had never once seen the woman who had quietly held his entire shattered life together, and who had done it while loving him, and who had now walked out into the dales before sunrise, rather than spend one more day beside a man who did not see her.
He should, perhaps, have respected her wish. A wiser man might have. But Nathaniel Hale rose from his chair with the note still in his hand, and he found that the thought of Eveline Carrow somewhere out in the cold autumn morning, alone, was a thing he could not bear. He did not yet understand what he felt. He only knew that he had to find her. And it was then, as he folded the note to put it in his coat, that he noticed the thing he had missed in his shock. There was writing on the back of the page, not the careful hand of the rest of the letter, but a few words scrawled fast and hard, as though added at the very last moment, by a hand that was afraid. He turned the page over and read them. "If a man named Sael comes asking for me, tell him nothing. Keep Grace inside. Trust no one from the North Road." The Duke stood very still in the cold study. The note suddenly weighed a great deal more than it had a moment before. Eveline had not simply left because she could not bear her own unspoken love. That was true. He did not doubt it was true. But it was not the whole of it. Something had frightened her. Someone. And whatever it was, she had been frightened enough to flee in the night, and yet careful enough, even in her fear, to leave behind a warning, to protect his daughter. He crossed to the window and looked out at the long gray road that ran north from Thornwood, disappearing into the mist over the dales. Somewhere out there, a woman who had loved him in silence for 4 years was running from something she had not named. And the Duke of Wexmoor, who had been asleep to his own life for far too long, finally, fully, woke up. The Duke rode north before the household had finished waking. He took only his fastest horse and a single trusted man, an old groom named Barrow, who had served the family since before Nathaniel was born, and who could be relied upon to ask no questions.
He left orders that Grace was not to leave the house, that the gates were to be watched, and that any stranger from the North Road was to be turned away and reported to him at once.
The servants thought their master had finally lost his reason, grieving widower chasing a governess across the dales at dawn. He let them think it. The warning on the back of that note had lodged in him like a splinter, and he could not rest until he understood it. The North Road ran up out of the valley and into high, lonely country, all stone walls and gray sky, and sheep scattered across the fells like fallen clouds. Eveline had perhaps 4 hours' start on him, on foot, with one small trunk. A woman alone could not have gone far. He stopped at the first village, a cluster of stone cottages around a single inn, and there he had his first piece of luck, and his first piece of dread. The innkeeper remembered her. a tall, plain woman with steady eyes, who had come through before first light, asking the way to Kirkby and the coaching road beyond. But she had not been the only one asking after a woman that morning. An hour after she passed through, the innkeeper said, 2 men had come riding hard from the south, and they too had asked about a tall woman traveling alone. They had not given their names, but one of them, a lean man with a scar across the back of his hand, had spoken with an accent the innkeeper did not know, and had left a coin on the counter that bought a great deal of helpfulness. The innkeeper, God forgive him, had told them she'd gone toward Kirkby. The Duke's blood ran cold. Eveline was not 4 hours ahead of him. She was being hunted, and the hunters were already between him and her. He rode harder. By midday, the mist had burned off, and the dales lay open and golden under a hard, bright autumn sun. And Nathaniel Hale had pieced together a little more of the truth from the people along the road. A shepherd here, a carter there, all of whom had seen the tall woman, and all of whom had seen the 2 men following. And slowly a picture formed that he did not like at all. The men were gaining. A woman on foot could not outrun mounted men, however clever she was, and Eveline was clever. She had left the main road twice, doubling back, taking field paths, doing everything a frightened and intelligent person could do to lose a pursuer. But it would not be enough. He knew, with a sick certainty, that it would not be enough. He found her trunk first. It was sitting beside a stile, where a footpath crossed a stone wall, abandoned, its lid thrown open, its contents scattered across the grass, as though someone had searched it in a great hurry. The Duke swung down from his horse and knelt among her things, her plain dresses, a worn Bible, a child's drawing that he recognized, with a lurch, as one of Grace's, kept and treasured all this time, and tucked into the lining of the trunk's lid, where a searching hand had missed it. He found a packet of letters bound in faded ribbon. He should not have read them. He read them anyway, there on his knees in the grass, because every one of them might tell him who was hunting her and why. They did. The letters told a story Eveline had never breathed a word of in 4 years at Thornwood. She had not always been a vicar's widow's recommendation, a quiet, plain governess from the next county. Before that, years before, she had been the wife of a man named Sael Drummond, a charming, ruthless man who had courted her young and married her fast, and revealed himself, too late, to be something very dark indeed.
He had been a forger and a thief, a man who moved stolen money through false names across half of England.
And Eveline, his young wife, had slowly come to understand what her husband was, and worse, had come to hold the proof of it, the names, the false accounts, the ledger he could not afford any living soul to see.
She had run from him. Years ago, she had taken the one thing that could destroy him, and she had vanished, reinventing herself as a plain governess in a quiet corner of Yorkshire, hiding in a duke's household, precisely because no one would ever think to look for the wife of a wanted criminal in such a place.
For 4 years it had worked. She had been safe. She had built a small, quiet life, loving a man and a child, who never knew the danger she carried.
And then something had broken the spell. The Duke read it in the last letter, the most recent, dated only a week before, in a hand he did not know but could guess at. Sael Drummond had found her. After all these years, he had learned where his runaway wife was hiding.
The letter was short and almost gentle in its cruelty. It said only that he was coming, that he wanted what she had taken, and that he would burn down everything around her to get it. The great house, the child, all of it, unless she came to him alone and brought the ledger. That was why she had left. The Duke understood it now. All of it. The full shape of her courage. She had not fled to escape her own unspoken love. She had fled to draw the danger away from Thornwood, from Grace, from him. She had walked out into the dales alone, carrying the one thing a dangerous man wanted, precisely so that he would follow her and not come to the house. She had left the warning on the note in case her plan failed. She had been willing to face Sale Drummond alone, to die alone if it came to that, rather than let her secret bring harm to the people she loved. And she had told none of them. She had simply gone. The Duke knelt in the grass with the letters in his hands, and something rose in him that was no longer guilt and no longer grief, but something fiercer and clearer than anything he had felt in years. He had spent 4 years asleep beside the bravest person he had ever known, and he had never seen her. He saw her now. He saw her completely, and he was not going to let her face this alone. He gathered the scattered things back into the trunk, all but the letters, which he put inside his coat, and he mounted his horse and turned its head toward Kirkby. Old Barrow looked at his master's face and did not ask what he had read. They reached the high crossroads above Kirkby as the afternoon light was beginning to slant gold across the fells. And there, the Duke reined in hard, because down in the hollow below, where the field path met the coaching road, he could see them. 3 figures. A tall woman standing very straight, her brown hair come loose in the wind, and 2 men, dismounted now, moving toward her slowly from either side, the way men move when their quarry has nowhere left to run. The lean one with the scarred hand had drawn something that caught the light.
She had been caught, out in the open, on the road, with the gold autumn light pouring down over the fells, as though the world did not know or care what was about to happen in that quiet hollow.
The Duke did not hesitate. He drove his heels into his horse and sent it plunging down the slope toward them. And across the distance, he saw Eveline's head come up, saw her see him, and even from there, he could read the look on her face. It was not relief, it was horror.
Because the one thing she had given everything to prevent, the man she loved, riding straight into the danger she had tried so hard to carry away from him, was happening anyway, right before her eyes, and there was nothing she could do to stop it.
The horse hit the bottom of the slope at a gallop, and the 2 men turned at the sound of it, and for one held breath everything in the gold-lit hollow stopped. The lean man with the scarred hand recovered first.
He was fast, and he was not afraid, and he stepped between the Duke and Eveline, with his blade low and ready, a man who had done this kind of work before. The second man, heavier and slower, moved to cut off the Duke's approach from the other side. They had hunted a woman on foot, and now there was a man on horseback. But 2 against 1 was still 2 against 1, and these were not men who frightened easily. But Nathaniel Hale was no longer the hollow, grieving ghost who had drifted through Thornwood for 4 years. Something had burned that man away on the road that morning.
He came off the horse before it had fully stopped, and he came at the scarred man without a word, and the first blow took the man by surprise, because gentlemen were not supposed to fight like that, with the cold fury of someone who has stopped caring what it costs.
Steel met steel. The Duke had been taught sword work as a boy, the polite fencing of a nobleman, and he had forgotten most of it. But the scarred man's blade glanced off his arm, drawing a hot line of blood, and the pain cleared his head rather than clouding it. He stopped trying to fence.
He drove forward, inside the man's reach, and used his weight and his height and his rage, and the 2 of them went down together into the grass, struggling for the knife. "Eveline, run!"
the Duke shouted.
"The road! Run!"
But Eveline Carrow did not run. She had spent 4 years being quiet, being invisible, asking for nothing, carrying her secret and her love in silence. She had spent that whole morning trying to give her own life to keep these people safe. And now, watching the man she loved bleeding in the grass for her sake, something in her that had been folded small and silent for a very long time finally came open. The heavier man had turned from the Duke to seize her, certain she was no threat, a plain governess, a woman alone. He was wrong. Eveline snatched up the only thing within reach, a loose stone the size of her fist from the crumbling wall beside the road, and she brought it down on the back of the man's skull, with every silent year behind it.
He dropped without a sound. She did not stop to see him fall. She was already moving toward the two men struggling in the grass, the stone still in her hand. The scarred man had the knife now. He had wrenched it free, and he had the Duke beneath him, and he was bringing it down, and the gold light flashed once along the blade. Eveline did not think. She swung the stone into the side of his head as he struck, and the blow turned the knife aside, so that it buried itself in the earth beside the Duke's shoulder instead of his throat. The scarred man rolled, dazed, reaching for the blade again.
And the Duke, freed, drove his fist into the man's face once, twice, until he went still at last in the trampled grass. Then there was only the wind, and the gold light, and the two of them on their knees in the hollow, breathing hard, staring at one another.
"You should not have come," Eveline said. Her voice shook. Her hands shook. "I left so that you would not come. Do you understand? I left so that this would never touch you. And you came anyway." "Yes," the Duke said. "I came anyway." "Why?" The word broke out of her. 4 years of it, all at once. You never even saw me. For 4 years you looked straight through me. I was furniture to you. I was part of the house. Why would you ride into this for a woman you never even 014? "Because I was a fool," he said.
Because I was a blind, grieving fool, and I let the best thing in my house care for me and my child, and ask for nothing, and I never once looked up to see her.
I am looking now, Eveline. I see you now. I see all of it.
He reached out and took her shaking hand in his bloodied one. "And I am not going to spend the rest of my life letting you walk away from me into the dark to keep me safe. I would rather be in the dark with you than safe without you." Eveline Carrow, who had loved this man in silence for 4 years and never once expected a single word in return, looked at him through the gold autumn light, and at last she let herself believe it. There was still the matter of Sael Drummond. He did not come to the hollow himself. Men like Sael Drummond never did their own hunting. But the proof Eveline had carried for all those years, the ledger she had hidden so carefully, was finally given the chance she had never dared give it before. With the Duke of Wexmoor standing behind her, his name and his rank shielding her at last, Eveline brought everything she had to the magistrates: the false accounts, the forged names, the whole record of her husband's crimes that she had guarded in secret for so long. A plain governess had never dared move against a man like Drummond alone. A duke and his betrothed, with a wall of evidence and the protection of the law, were another matter entirely. The two men from the hollow talked, as such men do, to save their own necks, and they gave up Sael Drummond's hiding place, along with everything else. He was taken within the month, on the coaching road south, still believing himself untouchable, still believing his runaway wife, too frightened to ever speak. He was wrong about that, as he had been wrong about her from the beginning. He had married a quiet woman, and mistaken her silence for weakness. It had never been weakness. It had only ever been patience, and courage, and a heart that knew exactly when to stay still, and exactly when to strike. With Drummond's crimes laid bare, the marriage he had trapped her in years before was dissolved by the courts, and Eveline Carrow was free at last, free in a way she had not been since she was a girl. They were married the following spring, in the small gray church in the valley below Thornwood, with little Grace scattering early bluebells down the aisle, and old Barrow weeping openly in the back pew and pretending it was the cold. Eveline wore no grand gown. She did not need one. The Duke, watching her come up the aisle toward him, thought he had never in his life seen anything he wanted to look at more, and he made himself a quiet promise, standing there at the altar, that he would never again be a man who looked through her. He would spend the rest of his days looking at her, properly, the way she had always deserved to be seen. She came to live, not as the governess of Thornwood Hall, but as its mistress, and the great house that had stood so long under a shadow of grief filled slowly, with light and noise, and the sound of a child, who now had, at last, a mother who would never leave in the night. The Duke kept her goodbye note. He never told her so, but he kept it, folded in a drawer of the writing desk where he had first found it. Not for the part that had warned him of Sale Drummond, the danger long past now. He kept it for the few lines in the middle, in her careful, steady hand, where a woman who had asked for nothing her whole life had finally, on her way out the door, dared to write down the one thing she had never been able to say. And sometimes, on quiet mornings, when the mist lay gray across the dales and the house was still sleeping, he would take it out and read those lines again and remember how close he had come to never knowing.